Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. One of my favorite aspects stemming from the realm of plant medicines and psychedelics alike is the never-ending questions that I find those who connect with these medicines ask about life as a whole. For me, curiosity, imagination, and awe make up some of my favorite states of awareness in life. And when I have the opportunity to meet others who not only share a mutual love for these medicines and states, but are also passionate about diving into their own investigations into the many mysteries that present themselves within these spaces, I get extremely excited from the depths of my soul to discuss these topics with them. Today's guest on the show is one of those individuals that when I first met, I was blown away at how many similarities we had, specifically within the realm of how we view cannabis as a tool for self-development and self-awareness. Cannabis has been one of my main passions in life for over half of my life now, and trust me when I say that the way in which I, as well as today's guest, speak about cannabis is not the way in which most people view the plant. And as such, when we first connected, I knew I wanted to dive into her world and have the opportunity to have her on the show. She is a dedicated mother, a committed nurse who has spent the last 14 years working in critical care, is a graduate of the Connect with Cannabis program, and is a proponent of the conscious, intentional use of plant medicines in one's life in order to maximize their quality of life. In addition, she has had intimate experience helping her father through opioid dependency through holistic means, including cannabis. And in today's episode, we will be diving into her experience in these realms, some of her favorite ways to connect with the cannabis plant, and her experience with certain other medicines as well. So, with all of the foundation being laid, please help me in welcoming Ariane Williams onto the show. Ariane, what's up? So good to see you.
So good to be here, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, you are so welcome. And, I think the interest stated it all. I mean, when I first met you, I was like, wow, someone who speaks my language, and it was so cool because, I've said this before on the show, but starting Connect with Cannabis, I mean, when I started viewing cannabis in this way, I had no idea what was happening because at that point, I didn't have the resources to look into the fact that this is how indigenous cultures have interacted with this plant for thousands of years. And actually, the way we interact with it now as a society is pretty new, where it's kind of used to numb out and do these things. And so when I met you and when I've met other people that went through Connect with Cannabis, it was amazing because, for a long time, I thought I was alone in viewing cannabis like this. And what I've realized is not only am I not alone, but there is a growing movement. And you and I are at the forefront of that movement. And I am so grateful, for your insights and for your knowledge on this plant and along with the whole psychedelic realm in and of itself, because I think that the more we can have people like yourself who are a registered nurse coming out and talking about these things and doing so in a way that's not just saying, hey, these are amazing, do them all the time, but is more so saying, hey, in order to recognize that these are useful in one's life, you have to really be able to use discernment. And I think that there's a lot that comes before one can even use discernment. And I think that where a lot of people I've noticed, get into challenges or muddy waters with psychedelics is that they kind of use them in a way, and this might not even be conscious, but the way that I see it a lot is they're kind of using them as a scapegoat or kind of like, oh, I'll hack the system and up level my development with these medicines. But what we know is that if they're not integrating, and by integrating, I mean actually doing the inner work, doing the stillness exercises, the awareness exercises, well, then they're not really using a medicine or teacher. They're just simply using a substance. And so I'd love to hear how you first got introduced to cannabis and then how you started framing it in the way that we frame it, right? As conscious, as being able to be this powerful tool for self-development, self-awareness, because if you're like me, when I first started using it, I was having these interesting experiences, but I had no way in which to frame them. And so it wasn't until years later that I really started to catch on to this whole conscious cannabis thing. And so I'm curious if your journey was similar.
Yeah. So my journey was very similar to that. The first time that I ever interacted with the plant, I was 16. And over the years, especially being a nurse, it's not like I was always consuming, but I was connecting in different ways and doing different things. So I've had an evolution if you will, in my relationship with the plant. And I knew of all the medicinal benefits of it. And that's where I really fell down the rabbit hole. When I started understanding how it worked with me and how it worked with other people and helping with my dad and stuff, and like the stoner culture that has been created, right? That was created out of prohibition. When I learned more of the history, I was like, wait, no, like we're doing it all wrong here. And it just like lit this fire in me to be like, let's talk about it differently. Let's look at using it more consciously, more intentionally, because that's how we optimize our experience. That's how we can truly like get the most benefit out of this like incredibly versatile plant. So I guess it really started a couple of years ago. I mean, I've on and off doing just looking at investigation over the years, but like really probably about 2 years ago or so, I just really started going deep with it. And then like, kind of like you said, oh, someone is speaking my language. That's like when I heard you on that podcast with Paul Check, and I was like, holy crap, who is this person? Like, I have to talk to him. Like, we're talking the same thing, because like, I feel like part of the stigma that goes along with all of this is just that like stoners do check out, that they are numb, that, they aren't doing things. They're not really successful or contributing to society. And it's like, oh, no. And let me show you why.
Yeah. I love that. And, I had these two people on, Matt and Maggie, I believe their last name is Spear. And, Matt said something really funny about when he first started getting into psychedelics and, starting to like just become aware of them. He met this gentleman who was extremely successful and was hitting a lot of buttons in the psychedelic world. He got brought up, I believe, in either Catholicism or Christianity, one or the other, which was like poo-pooing plant medicines. And so he spoke to this individual and was like, hey, man, like, how are you this successful? Like, you're quote unquote a stoner, you're doing mushrooms, you're sitting with LSD, all these things. And the guy was like, sit down for a second. He's like, hey, man, you're still living in Muggle world where you think that, anyone who interacts with these medicines is like a burnout and is living on their mom's couch. He's like, let me tell you, most very successful people are either psychedelic users or they've benefited from some sort of psychedelic experience. Because in order to really be successful, especially at a big level, you need to have an insane amount of awareness or you're going to burn out, right? And so there are ways through meditation and breath work and ways in which to do that. But a lot of people don't have 20 years to go sit on top of the mountain and really tune into themselves. And so if someone is doing inner work and, into self-development as a quasi term, and then they start interacting with psychedelics, that can really be a positive relationship. And so he was like, oh, interesting. And so, of course, then he got interested in trying psychedelics for himself. And after some discernment, decided, okay, I'm going to start sitting with these medicines, and found the same thing in his life. And I think this is a big point to say that, plant medicines, but especially cannabis, will accentuate who you already are. And I think this is one of the first things I heard that spoke to the individual power within our experiences and why these archetypes of like the lazy stoner archetype, well, it's not an objective thing, right? Every single person that's ever interacted with cannabis is not a lazy stoner. What are the other parameters there? And so one of the things we put in the program is that like, hey, cannabis doesn't make you anything. You make who you are. And you can use cannabis as a permission slip to accentuate that. And then what a lot of people do is they go, oh, well, cannabis makes me lazy and I'm addicted to cannabis, so I'm completely victimized and I can't do anything about it. Or my partner comes home and wants to smoke cannabis every night, so I could never not smoke cannabis every night. And I think these things are a lot of ways in which people just give their power away. One thing I say a lot that I think, we agree on is that I'm not here to tell anyone how their relationship with cannabis should look, right? I'm not going to should all over people, tell them, oh, you should only be doing it this much per week, or you should only do it, in ceremony or any of these things. But in reality, my intention is to open up awarenesses of things that I've experienced and then have people try them on like a dressing room. And if they fit them well and they want to go home with that and try it out, great. But if they don't, great. I'm not attached to anything that I say. I realize that, I think that that's really one of the challenges that I see in the psychedelic realm is that it really takes a lot of personal power to be able to interact with these substances as medicines and teachers. And I think a lot of people just haven't done the back end work to have that personal power and to recognize it before getting into this realm. And that's one of the biggest challenges I've seen. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the biggest part is just like you said, the lack of not unawareness, but like lack of intention with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are we going into these spaces for? And it's neither right nor wrong. And I mean, I don't create problems for people, right? But if
Yeah.
it becomes a problem for you, then there's ways to address it. But what is
Yes.
your intention behind it? And if
Yes.
you've lost your intention along the way, then it's time for you to step back, reevaluate, and then get back in touch with that intention or change it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, because I'm right there with you, like, I'm not going to tell somebody how much they can use, and I'm not going to judge someone who's using, multiple times a day to
Mm-hmm.
do whatever they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't create problems for people.
Mm-hmm.
But when it becomes an issue, if it becomes an issue, there's steps you can take to reevaluate and then change it, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
personal responsibility and accountability that comes along with it. I mean, I think that
absolutely.
cannabis gets thrown around as like a scapegoat for a lot of people. And it's like, no, what are you doing? What's going on in your life? How has this using this tool changed for you? So it's
It's
either right or wrong.
exactly. And it's funny you mentioned that, because that quote, with great power comes great responsibility. I think whoever made
Mm-hmm.
that unintentionally made it for the psychedelic community, because I don't think I've ever seen area that has greater power within it, that's a potential, but that also has an equal amount of responsibility. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges I see, is that a lot of people think they're going to hit these buttons and they're always going to be great and everything's going to be hunky dory, and then they can potentially traumatize themselves. And this can happen with cannabis too. I just was speaking to someone that wants to get into the program, and they were saying, like, yeah, I ate a really strong edible once at a party when I was younger and didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I'd already had a couple of drinks and thought it'd be fun, and had a really traumatizing experience. And now I'm really nervous to, sit with cannabis again. And I said, well, hey, kudos on you for at least recognizing that and not just hitting the button again. But at the same time, like, okay, cool. How can we realize that, like, there were other things minus just the strength that might have made that experience uncomfortable? Number one, set and setting was terrible for that. Number two, there was no intention, right? So, like, there are these things that, I think when we hear like set and setting or intention or these things, they sound amazing and they are incredible. But I think that one of the things that, I wish someone had told me is like what they actually act for. And what I found is like what set and setting, what intention, what all these things do is give you anchor points to your normal lease on reality while you are traveling. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you're having a very challenging experience, but you've set your intention, you're in the right setting, you have the right set moving into it, aka your mental state, then you're at least able to, like, if you're having this challenging experience and you start crying, you're not worried about who you're crying around because you're in a positive setting. If, you go into this and you're in a good state of mind and then you see something come up, well, you know what? At least you're in a good state of mind and you can at least try to find some correlations of how this might apply to your life. If you have an intention to say, be happy, and then you start experiencing anxiety, well, then you have the awareness to be able to go back to your anchor and go, well, you know what? I'm allowing this plant to work through me. Maybe what's standing in the way of my innate happiness is this anxiety that I'm going through right now. These things allow you to have anchor points in your normal lease on reality while you're still traveling. It's almost like, the telephone game with the cord. You have one can, and if you set your intention, you have the right set and setting, you have a string, like you have that can and you have a string. And so you can still talk to like your normal self, like your normal lease on reality, even while you're very far away from that. And I think that, for a lot of people, they don't really classify cannabis as a psychedelic. But if you look up the textbook definition of a psychedelic, it's a substance which produces hallucinations. And for anyone who's eaten edible specifically, even someone who's interacted with cannabis through inhalation methods, but especially on the edible side, I see fractals. I see lots of different things. I see images. I see visuals. I mean, all of these things count as hallucinations. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is that people don't see cannabis as a psychedelic. And so therefore they either do too much with it, they either kind of throw it to the curb. I mean, that's something both you and I have gone through, right? Where people are like, cannabis, that dirty drug, or like, what the hell? Talk about mushrooms. Oh, psilocybin's the thing. And it's like, all these medicines are great. They all have their, certain uniqueness to them. But for me, cannabis has always been my biggest teacher, because it's the one that has allowed me to connect with myself at a much deeper, more realistic level. And what I mean by that is that, sure, when I've had very large psilocybin doses or LSD or even MDMA, I've connected to my heart, my higher self, my soul, right? Which is all incredible. But how do you relate that to like folding laundry? How do you relate that to like meal prepping? All the things that you might be like, oh, that's frustrating. I just wish I didn't have to do these things. Well, cannabis has been the thing that I've been able to connect with and go into my mundane tasks and find the beauty in them. And I think that, that's really one of the sleeper components of cannabis that a lot of people are missing, because in an age where we're constantly told we're living in an epidemic of loneliness, but in reality, we're actually just living in an epidemic of the inability to connect. Well, to the degree that you can connect with anything is the degree you connect with everything. So I think a lot of people think about like connecting with a romantic partner, connecting with friends, going to a party together, which is all great. But if you can't connect with yourself to fold your own laundry and do these things, well, then you're omitting like 90% of your daily life and looking forward to only 10% of your life. It's like the whole, waiting for the week to end so you can get to those 2 days where you can let loose. It's crazy, it's quite the paradox.
Yeah, for sure. And like, as far as the edibles go, in a matter of like a few days, I had 3 people reach out to me about experiences that they had with edibles. And I think it's important for people, I know people take it for granted, right? On how powerful this can be. And understanding, bringing the awareness around the possibility of what you're getting yourself into when you take these edibles is important, because it is much more like concentrated when your body metabolizes it. Like, do use discernment, do think about like, do not take it for granted that this is just 25 milligrams. Like, the dosages that we're seeing on the market today are crazy and unnecessary, and they will induce a very heavy experience that you might not have signed up for.
Yes.
And I mean, is that good or bad? Like, it's all perspective, because like some of the people that I talked to like ended up being very grateful, like once they were on the other side, for the things that came up, to the things that they had to address that they had been avoiding, right? Because of how the deep introspection that this can do. But neither of them signed up for that. None of them did.
Yes.
Right? And it's like, y'all, I'm going to need you to think about it.
What is up, everybody? I hope you are all enjoying the show. And I wanted to stop by real quick and share a little bit about our latest podcast sponsor, Freedom Builders. Now, Freedom Builders are a team of graphic designers, website creators, videographers, social media marketing experts, and coaches that build out your custom online business from A to Z. This is a done-for-you service, which means they do the work for you while you get to put your focus back on what you love most, which is coaching your clients and bringing in sales. Now, as a former online fitness coach, Mike knows where your struggle points are and exactly how to help you overcome them. This is why he created Freedom Builders, so that you can scale your business while protecting your time and your energy. Now, you guys know that delegation is a business superpower, and you can activate this superpower today by scheduling a complimentary call with Mike at freedombuilders.com so you can start building the freedom that allows you to take your business to the next level. Alex and I recently connected with Freedom Builders for our Connect with Cannabis build-out, and we could not have been happier with the results. With Mike and his team, they were able to go through an outline and create a personalized program for our experience, develop our brand identity, build and design a custom branded webpage, professionally edit our program video content, custom design all of our slide presentations, automate our email marketing sequences, create a seamless payment system for our offer, design unique infographics for our social media content, and guide us through our proven launch blueprint to generate organic leads through our social media. So if you're a coach, facilitator, or healer listening to this ad right now, and you are looking to put freedom back into your life, once again, go to freedombuilders.com and book your complimentary call today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the show, and I'm wishing you the best day ever. When I look into it, I mean, we have, at least here in, Massachusetts, where cannabis is fully legal. I worked in the industry for 5 years. And so I used to watch how they make these edibles. And in most cases, I won't mention any names of places, but, in most cases, edibles are made from distillate, which is very high in THC. It's very low in other cannabinoids. And what we know about THC is that, yes, it is one of the intoxicating components of cannabis, but the thing that kind of balances it out and gives that entourage effect are the other constituents of the plant. And so when you're removing those, you're kind of removing the safety devices that are built into cannabis to not allow you to have too challenging of an experience. And so this is like where technology starts, it's not technology, it's how man uses technology, starts to go, hey, why is cannabis made in this way with all these different constituents? Not just like, oh, well, you know what? Quantitatively, THC is what people want, so we're going to isolate that and just sell it. It's like, well, hey, what if we start educating people on the fact that it's not just THC that you should be looking for within this plant? And the other side of it too is that with distillate, a common industry secret for distillate is that with CO2 distillation, you can remediate mold. And so what this means is that if you have a harvest that fails for mold, well, you don't just scrap it. You probably put it through a CO2 distillator and you remediate the mold. So yes, like technically there is no mold. I'm not coming on here saying that the industry is selling mold. There are other ways in which they might be doing that. I'm not going to say that, but through this, they are remediating the mold. But what's the energy of a plant that had mold in it, right? It's almost like if you are a sick person and then you are trying to heal someone with that sick energy, right? And so like, imagine, in a psychological point of view, if your therapist has a really bad case of schizophrenia and then is trying to help you with schizophrenia, right? Like, probably not going to be the best way in which to do that. Now, if this person has managed their schizophrenia through either inner work or pharmaceuticals or whatever it takes, and then they are helping, that's a different story. But that would be the equivalent of, oh, you have maybe botrytis on your plant, not powdery mildew because it's systemic, but you have this botrytis, you remove it, you test the plant, it comes out perfect, and then maybe you sell it. But at the same time, these plants are living entities and they're mostly traumatized in these big grow facilities because they're growing under artificial lights. They're being grown by many different people, right? Most cultivation facilities have a good amount of people on hand. And not every one of these people are probably showing up to work in the best mood. And they're not getting paid the most money. And especially what's going on in the world right now with inflation and everything. I mean, just think about some of the challenges and anxieties these plants are present to on a daily basis. And then you're being sold that. And so this is why I'm such a big proponent of anyone who lives somewhere you can do so legally, cultivating your own medicine. Because it's really the only way to know that if you're interacting with cannabis and something comes up, well, if you grew it, there's no one else to look at except yourself. Okay, I'm experiencing some side of myself. Now let me dive into this and go, okay, what is this plant reflecting back to me that I might not be aware of in my day-to-day consciousness that is now able to be illuminated for me? Even though there's so much amazing stuff happening within the realm of cannabis, there's still a lot of ways to go because, again, we've only looked at quantitative measures in the industry, and even that's not really done that well, right? So perfect example is, oh, we're going to hike the THC up on everything because that's what people want. But at the same time, it's like, well, should you just be hiking it up because that's what people want, or should you be re-educating people on what they actually want and what the experience that is like a quote unquote good experience is? Because just on the side of like intoxication, sure, if someone's looking to get the most intoxicated they can with cannabis, well, if they're only looking at Delta 9 THC, they might find a strain that's very low in Delta 9 THC, but has a higher amount of THCP, which might not even be tested yet by most quantitative tests that are done in the industry, that might be a lot more intoxicating and a lot more pain relieving. Say if this person's in cancer treatment and they're having a lot of pain, and so they're looking for a high Delta 9, but they're omitting this one that maybe has 14 or 15% Delta 9, but has a higher concentration of THCP that might actually give them a much more pain relieving effect. There's just so much in this realm. And it's like crazy because that moment that I think a lot of people that do psychedelics get to, that I've gotten to many times, where I was like, wow, I don't know anything, right? Like there's so much to this. Like this one issue, right, of like, let's just say quantitative measures is like actually 100 different issues. What are all of those? And then which ones are those going to lead to? And it's like, it's just this blooming effect. It's like a blooming onion, it just keeps going out and out. And it's fascinating. And I'm curious for you, like, as a nurse, what are some of the challenges you've seen with people in cannabis, right? Like specifically within the realm of some lack of awareness that's maybe gotten them into some sticky situations?
I can speak from my own personal experience with that, where I've gotten to a point at one point in my life where I was over consuming and just completely like I numbed myself out and like worsened my depression and my anxiety and all of the things, right? And it became a problem. You know, most of the time when I have people who have come to me, it is they're wanting, there's a lot of guilt and shame around why they use or the way they use or that they're using, because I mean, I think a lot of it is harped on like, well, are you using it for a medicinal purpose? This plant is so incredibly versatile that that's only a fragment of what it has to offer, right? So I have people who come to me with that, and not that it's necessarily causing problems in their lives other than it's making them feel like crap, which is a huge issue.
Yeah,
like whenever you have shame around the way you're doing things and you're like isolating yourself because you don't want people to know that you smoke, right? And so it's just this huge disempowerment that has been created from prohibition that I think is like the biggest thing that I've seen that's an issue with cannabis, right? Because again, I don't, that's generally what people are coming to me and saying. It's like, I would like to change my relationship with it. I would like to better understand it. Like, I want to be able to talk to my family about it and stuff like that. As far as it being like huge problems, I mean, I've never seen that to be for anybody really. I mean, maybe it, other than it's a huge issue on their paychecks, like, and it's like, all right, like, let's reevaluate that. Let's talk about it. Let's see what other things that we can do that can help like change this for you.
Absolutely.
So.
I mean, yeah, this is the great part about cannabis, as aside from some other psychedelics, is that, unless you really mess up and unless you're like eating 1,000 milligram edible or something and you've never used cannabis before, like there are ways to potentially really traumatize yourself. But with regards to other psychedelic medicines, it seems much more challenging to have a really traumatizing experience with cannabis as opposed to psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, something like that. But that being said, there are these things where it's kind of like smaller cuts over time, versus a big cut where, like you were saying, I had the same thing happen where I numbed out after a while. And the challenging loop that I got myself in was that, well, if cannabis has made me feel better in the past, well, then no matter how I'm feeling now, I'm not actually going to look at why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. I just know what will make me feel better. But the thing that would make me feel better, aka cannabis, was not actually really making me feel better. And the challenge I had was that, what did I do? Well, I blame the plant. Oh, it must be cannabis is doing it. It's like, no, idiot. It's not cannabis. It's how you're interacting with cannabis and your mental state and your emotional state and all these things that you're not looking at. And you're choosing to use this plant to numb them out instead of actually use the plant to tune you into them. And I think that's one of the things that when a lot of people come to me, they're kind of aware. They're like, okay, yeah, like some things are coming up. Like maybe they had an experience where maybe unconsciously they were making the intention of like, I just need to look at this stuff. And they didn't exactly know why all of a sudden cannabis shifted for them and showed them all these really scary things. And they're like, what the hell's happening? I used to be able to just smoke this and play video games or smoke and take a walk. And now I'm like smoking and experiencing what I would call the shadow or any of these things. And I think that, the biggest challenge with prohibition, like you brought up, is lack of guidance, lack of education, lack of informed consent, right? Where really people don't know what they're interacting with. And now all of a sudden it's just legal, right? So you have these people come in, they're like, hey, my doctor recommended it to me. A lot of the people that are coming into our dispensary are age 55 plus. And so they're dealing with, arthritis and degenerative conditions. And so their doctor's like, well, hey, there's this thing. It's less harmful than pharmaceuticals by all means. I think that's pretty objective in nature. And so they're like, why don't you try this instead of me putting you on another pharmaceutical? Great intention. But they come in and they're not really aware that, again, this is a mild psychedelic. And so in that sense, like it's not just going to take your pain away without you actually going in to figure out what's happening and actually moving through it yourself. It's a co-communicative relationship that we must have with cannabis for it to be able to work this way. Because like we say all the time, cannabis can show you the what, but it's up to you to figure out the how, right? It's not going to give you the answers on the test. It might tell you what to study, but it's not going to actually do the test for you. And I think that's where a lot of people get misconstrued, is that because we've been used to this industry of pharmaceuticals where it's like, you take this pill and you get a result, right? And spoiler alert, it doesn't actually remove the problem. It just removes the signals of your body telling you there's something wrong, which is another whole, rabbit hole to go down. But, with cannabis, I think that the biggest challenge I have with older people, especially coming in that were first time users, is they expected like, okay, so I take this and my pain goes away. It's like, I don't know. I have no idea if that's going to happen, but there's a chance. But there's also an equal chance that you're going to find that your pain might not just be back pain. It might be some emotional trauma that you had as a child with your mother or father prenatally, something like that, that you're still stuck in, like you're almost fragmented. This is where like the Native Americans talk about soul retrieval and shamanism, where like there was an event that happened that fragmented you. And so there's still aspects of you living back as that 4-year-old child who's going through these things. I mean, I do a lot of, we were talking before we hit record, I do a lot of emotion code healings. And what this has shown me, which by the way, for anyone listening, I highly recommend emotion code. It is amazing because I've done a lot of different programs where, they try to bring you back to these traumatic events and have you relive them to release them. And I think that's just a really archaic and potentially challenging way to deal with these emotions, because in theory, it sounds great, right? Yeah, you're going to go back and you're going to find that piece of you that's still stuck there and you're going to retrieve it. You're going to move through this emotion and realize you're stronger and come out the other side. Well, what if this person is already under a lot of stress in their life and now they're being tasked to go back to these extremely traumatizing moments? That could potentially fragment them more. It could traumatize them more. And so what I love about the emotion code is that, you're using kinesiology and muscle testing and magnets to be able to actually remove these energetic frequencies from your body. And so a lot of times it's really the practitioner is talking directly with your subconscious. And for anyone who wants to look this up in detail, you can look up David Hawkins' work with muscle testing and power versus force, because I think, when I first heard about muscle testing, I was like, that seems ridiculous, but there's actually a lot of science behind it. And with the emotion code and magnets, I mean, the book, The Emotion Code, teaches you actually the technique of how to do this. And it's really powerful. And I think that, combining these kind of things where potentially using, I mean, this is one of the ways I use cannabis, where I know that my ego and protection mechanisms are potentially like, omitting some of my traumatizing moments because they're trying to protect me. And so when I sit with cannabis, I might ask myself like, hey, what are some ideas? Like, what are some things to look into? And so maybe it gives me like, look into your relationship with your mother, look into this, look into that. I go, okay, cool. And then instead of trying to go show me the memory and go through that traumatizing event again, I go to my emotion code practitioner and I go, hey, something happened to my mom around age 8. Let's look into that. And then she'll release those things. And then I don't actually have to go and relive them, but I can literally feel the weight come off of me, and it's the most magical thing.
So
I've done so many different types of these modalities, and they're all amazing in one way, shape, or form. But the emotion code is it's the best one I found so far. It's really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely have had people like what you're talking about that have had traumatic things or memories come up, right? And it's a lack of understanding and the lack of like not really having really it's not understanding, because I mean, what were they sitting down to do? It's not like they were unaware, right? It's just
Yeah.
all of a sudden, that subconscious decided to present it to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so fun about teaching people how to use this medicine and truly understand it. I mean, I've heard of like cannabis having a very feminine energy to it. And for me, it's like a very mothering energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll like help your head, it'll soothe your pain, it'll calm your mind and like make your stomach feel better and all the things. And it just has such a comfort to it. And sometimes, like a good mom, it might show you some of your blind spots, right?
Yes.
The only thing that this plant really ever asks from anybody is just to get in touch with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wants you to be a part of this relationship. Because that's how you work with, that's how it works. So that's how it is for me, right? And my
Yeah.
perspective, I'm looking at it. And it's such a pleasure to like bring that like into people's forefront of like, well, why have you tried journaling with this? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And journaling doesn't look like writing all the time. Journaling for me looks like pulling out my phone and hitting record and just like speaking it into it,
Yes.
because I can go back and listen to it later, or opening notes and then like pressing like the dictation part and letting it just like do it that way. I mean, there's so many other ways. And not only are you like saving all those like high ideas that are coming through, right? but it enables you to be able to talk it out, gain that perspective change, and then move forward to integrate it.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. And, I think if there's one thing cannabis has allowed me to embody, it's the notion that life is not an observation sport. Because when I was interacting with cannabis as if it was an observation sport where I wasn't part of the equation and I was just expecting this plant to make me feel better over and over again, well, then it's very similar to, if you're a kid and you need something from your mother, right? You can ask her, Mom, can you get me this? And she'll say, sure, right? But at the end of the day, if you're still doing that at age 40, you're like, Mom, can you make me some pizza rolls? Your mom's like, okay, I guess. But your mom starts feeling a lot of resentment. Like, am I like screwing my son up here by like not allowing him to actually live his life? This is what happens a lot as people get older with cannabis too, is that they start having these awarenesses come in that they're like, what happened to the plant that I could just tune out with and, watch TV and just have a good time? And it's like, well, that plant is calling you into a higher version of yourself, one that takes more ownership over your own experience. And it's an opportunity, right? It's, just like a mother, it's not going to force you to do it like a more masculine energy will, like a boga or something like that. But at the same time, it will coerce you, right? And try to tell you like, hey, there's something here if you want to go into it. And that, very similar. I use this analogy all the time, but it's worth repeating. Very similar to if you're looking to build muscle and you go to the gym and you just keep lifting 3-pound weights, well, then you're probably not going to get much muscle. But if you start going there and you start pushing past the point at which your body goes, hey, like maybe we shouldn't do this much weight. If you push just past that, right? Not so much that you're brutalizing yourself when you're not ready, but just past your zone of comfort, well, then eventually you're going to start gaining this quantifiable measure of success, which in the gym analogy is muscle. With cannabis, it's like, you don't need to go, okay, cannabis, show me everything that I need to release. Like, I would not recommend that, right? But at the same time, you could go, show me just what's outside of my comfort zone that I'm willing and ready to be able to work on now. And that's why, like, intention is so important, because if someone understands intention, well, they also understand the second part, which is the most important part, is in surrendering after that and getting yourself out of the way and realizing that if you're not ready to surrender, then you're not ready to interact with the plant medicine, period. I don't care if it's cannabis. I don't care if it's, ayahuasca, psilocybin, LSD, any of them. If you're not willing to surrender, you're not in a good set for interacting with plant medicines, because you're
100%.
essentially, you're inviting this presence into you to illuminate things for you, to show you things. And so if you're not really at the point where you're like, okay, I'm ready to make a change, like as Paul Chek says, the pain teacher is now at a high enough point where you're like, you know what? Whatever I need to see, I'm ready to see, because living in this pain, I'm not going to do anymore. I think that's a perfect part or perfect place to be able to discern for yourself if plant medicines are right for you. Now, the reason I say if is because there are many different ways you can do this. You could do a Vipassana retreat. You could do other meditation retreats. You could do so many different self-development programs. And so I think that one of the biggest challenges too, that I've talked about in the show before, is that with this explosion in psychedelic popularity, I think a lot of people are buying into the trend that like, oh, this is the thing you do. Silicon Valley does it. You just get ideas and you do all these things. And I think that, a lot of people don't realize that, there are a lot of positive experiences you can have. But in my case, the best ones, the ones that have actually made the biggest change in my life, have been the ones that scared the shit out of me. And luckily, I was aware that that might potentially happen. So when it started happening, still scary, but at least I knew like, okay, this is a potential. But if you go into it and you don't know it's a potential and you think you're just going to have fun with friends and take some mushrooms and all of a sudden you're having a dark night of the soul, there's a lot of this shouldn't be happening. Something went wrong. All of those things are thoughts you do not want to have in a psychedelic experience, because the last thing you want to do is have to call 911 and go through that whole debacle. I think the world's worst setting for any psychedelic experience is a hospital. So, this is all to say, like, even with cannabis, we've heard of those stories of, there was this recording I heard years ago of this cop who got his hands on some edibles. I don't know if he took them from someone he arrested or whatever, but he ended up having to call 911 because he thought him and his wife were dying, and it's like, these are the kind of things where it's funny on one side because it's like, well, damn, you probably shouldn't have taken those edibles. But at the same time, it's like, I feel for them because I've been through challenging experiences and I've been very fortunate that I had the tools to be able to move through that. But I think that that's like the whole idea of what is our end of the bargain as human beings interacting with plant medicines. If we don't have our end of the bargain, like whether it's skill set, whether it's space in our lives to deal with what comes up, well, then we might want to wait, because again, like more is not better, I think objectively, but especially not in the psychedelic space. And I think that, I've said this before too, like as I've gotten older, my frequency of interacting with any plant medicine has gone down dramatically. And why? It's a sign that integration's working, is how I look at it, where I'm like, hey, I don't feel the call to these that much anymore because
Right.
I've integrated and my life's pretty awesome at this point, So it's funny.
But I think like the key in what you say in that is the integration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like you keep going back to the medicine, whatever you're using over and over and over again, and not doing anything with what you're receiving is
Mm-hmm.
going to create more fragmentation within your life. Like, and I think that's something that we see now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I have seen, especially in parts of the community that I've been around, is it's like good intentions, right? Going into it, and then, but not doing anything with what was received from it. And then once you've already seen it, you can't unsee it. And then, so now you're not doing anything about what you were told that you needed to do. So now there's all this other like enhanced ego because you're putting so much energy into these things inadvertently, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you don't, it's like you're trying to continue to like put plaster over a cracked house that just keeps cracking, and it's like you're gonna have to address it, right? Because you're just going to continue to fragment. It's just going to like you can't do it. You can't keep going to these medicines. And then when you do integrate, right, you realize that you don't need them as frequently in your life as you once did.
Mm-hmm.
And you start evolving away from it. Not saying that you're not still going to visit it, right? Every now and then, hang out, chill, see what's up, like get some downloads.
Yes.
But it's not a problem until it's a problem.
Yes. Exactly.
The integration is imperative.
Hello, everybody. I hope you are all enjoying the show. I wanted to stop by and fill you in on our brand new, completely free to join Facebook community called the Highly Optimized Ceremony Circle. I imagine many of you are aware of the newest creation within Highly Optimized, which is the Connect with Cannabis program. Alex and I are having so much fun empowering health and wellness professionals with the skill set of facilitating conscious cannabis and helping them up-level their facilitation practice, that we wanted to create a space where anyone could join to ask questions, receive free information on how to work with cannabis in the way we teach in the program, and be able to gain clarity around how to get the best results with their clients in order to become financially independent in their health and wellness practice. To join, hop over to the link in our Instagram bio and send us a request. It is our intention to assist as many health and wellness professionals as possible in the important work they are doing in the world. And if you are looking to join a community of like-minded individuals just like you, who are passionate about helping their clients achieve the highest quality of life possible, the Highly Optimized Ceremony Circle is for you. I am looking forward to speaking with all of you in the group, and as always, enjoy the show. I've tried to find the vocabulary to actually state how important integration is, and I feel like it's hard. It's like the only way I can come to it is like, it's the actual thing. Like, it's the whole thing. Like, why are you training for CrossFit, right? If you're not like, okay, let me put it this way, because some people train for CrossFit just for fun. If you're going to school to become a NASCAR driver, right? And then you never decide to actually do a race, well, then, okay, if you want a hobby, like fine. But if your intention is to become a professional race car driver, but all you do is spend your time in books and all you do is spend your time like maybe working on your car, but you never actually take on the track, well, then you're missing the entire point. The point is to eventually race the car. And so like with regards to plant medicines are kind of like, for me, they're the potential gained awareness. They are the potential to find out where in your daily life, in your sober reality, you're having these challenges come up. But the whole point is to integrate them so that your daily life starts to become the psychedelic experience, where you start to feel like that kid again, where everything is brand new and everything's amazing. And you have that curiosity, that imagination and awe that I talked about in the intro. That is the real gem of these experiences. But I think a lot of the people, they end up mistaking the psychedelic for the sun or moon, and the sun or moon is your experience of life. Cannabis, psilocybin, any of these medicines, they can provide the finger that points you back and reorients you onto your own sun and moon if you get disoriented. But if you end up mistaking them as the sun or moon, well, then essentially you're externalizing your power and you're essentially in the same thing that religion does, right? Where it's like, well, God is external to me. I have to go to this certain place to do it. And if you do that, that's totally fine. But in my own personal experience, what I've realized is that anything that takes the power away from me having my answers and just like having everything I already need within me, but potentially being blocked or limited, and these things illuminating where I may be blocked or limited so I can then do the work to unblock them and unlimit them, I'm just making up words now, but if I can take away, the things that are preventing me, the governors on my life that are preventing me from living the high quality experience that I am destined to live, well, then I'm just using substances. And I think that this is where education is so necessary, because I don't think a lot of people get into it. Like, you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm just going to like hit the button every weekend and that's going to be fun. I think they get into it because they mistakenly believe from people they hear that like the way to get healing is to do a lot of back-to-back sessions. And the medicine I see this with most frequently, besides cannabis, but cannabis, I don't think it's really the intention for most people to heal with right now. I think they're just kind of using it because they've used it for years. And it's kind of just like a lack of awareness. But ayahuasca is the medicine I see a lot, where it's almost like I've been going to music festivals for years. And so when Bass Nectar was big, this was like a thing where like it was always comical when I went to places, because people would be like, I've seen Bass Nectar 65 times and, blah, 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 and all these things. And I'm like, cool. Like, how are your experiences, right? Like, did you enjoy them? I want to hear more about the experiences, not just how many times you've done them. And I think with ayahuasca, it's like, hi, my name's Ryan. Hi, my name's so-and-so, and I've done ayahuasca 65 times. It's like, all right, cool. Like, awesome, but what are you getting from it? Like, what's your reasoning for doing it 65 times? Are you training to be a shaman? Like, maybe then it's worth doing 65 times. And again, it's not a judgment. It's just a very curious observation where I'm like, okay, if you're doing it that many times, what is your reason for it? You might have a perfect reason for it, but in most cases, I find like, well, I need healing. And it's kind of like that thing that I hear Cole talk about this a lot, where it's like, the more you dig, the more you're going to find, because you're placing an intention on like, I need to heal. So guess what's going to happen? You're going to invent things that you need to heal from. Where at the same time, if you go into it like, hey, I'm experiencing a challenge and I would like to gain some awareness on how to move through that in my life. Well, then you're not getting addicted to the healing archetype where you're like, I'm always in need of healing and there's always something to work on. You're just saying, hey, something's coming up right now in this moment that I'm curious and I'm stuck on. I've tried all my tools. I can't figure it out. I think there might be a limiting belief, a pattern, a program, something preventing me from seeing what's going on. And I've discerned from my life that plant medicines are going to help me. Then if you go into it with that type of intention, you might find that limitation. And then when you come back to daily life and you integrate, you figure out like, okay, maybe it's like, I use this example all the time, but it's like, maybe you realize that you have this creative block in your life and you've been working a lot for the last 10 years in finance, let's say, right? And so you discern and you end up interacting with the medicine and it shows you that you've been really yearning for painting in your life and you get all excited to paint. Well, if you come out of that experience and you don't actually do the how of like booking an appointment to either take art lessons or sign up for a local art class or something, or buy an art kit, and instead you just go, oh man, that was amazing, that experience. And then the next week goes by and you're like, I think I need more cannabis or insert medicine here to figure out that creative thing again. Well, it's like, it already showed you what it was. It's just that now it's up to you in your sober state of reality to take the initiative and do it.
Right. Right. I mean, and some people need like, that repeated branding in the brain of like,
I mean, I definitely
tell
did.
me again, tell me again. Right.
Because I thought I had no power in it. I didn't understand that part of like, oh, eventually you're just going to need to do the thing. Maybe, let's say you have 4 experiences and everyone shows you a deeper and deeper level of how much you really want to love painting. And so you're like, well, if I do it a 5th time, I'll even feel better about this whole idea of painting. It's like, well, yeah, potentially. Or you might have a challenging experience that shows you like all the dark night of the soul of how like you're not actually taking the initiative to do what you need to do to become the painter or whatever else you want to become.
Right.
But it's like, power is always within us. We have all the power to do whatever we want, to be whoever we want, to create whatever we want in this world. And I think that what these medicines are here is that reminder when we get stuck somewhere. They're like, hey, remember you have all the power. Remember you have all the answers. Don't come to me expecting it. Because again, it's like, I think I've said this analogy too, but if you're taking a psychology 1 course and you have this amazing teacher and you learn a lot from them, well, eventually you might go back to them a couple of times with questions, but eventually you're going to graduate and they're going to be like, hey, it's really great. Move on to psychology 2. Then you're going to have a new teacher. And so I think that that's like what Terence McKenna says of like, when you get the message, you can hang up the phone for a little while. And that's like how I interact with cannabis, where cannabis is, this beautiful entity that I can call on when I'm really stuck. But I also know that if I'm not really stuck, to exhaust every other option, because then when I do interact with cannabis, the first thing cannabis tells me every time is like, I'm really proud of you for doing the work. Like, I'm really proud of you for like taking what I showed you last time and integrating it. And okay, now you are ready for the next step. So now I can show you. And so it's this really beautiful power couple dynamic where the plant's proud of me. I'm proud of the plant for just everything the plant does. And so it's really cool. It's kind of like, in the mother analogy again, it's like if your mother takes care of you, and, gives you some support, in college or whatever. And then you come back, 5 years later and you're like, hey, mom, I'm going to buy you that car you always wanted because, you helped me out and now I'm going to do that. Well, like, how cool is that type of relationship versus just like your mom pays for your college, you go to college and then you just never think you're ready. So you just continue living at her house and just being like, I'm not ready yet. It's not perfect. It's like, eventually she's going to be like, come on, you got to do something with this, So it's really
Right.
interesting.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, totally. And the thing is that, I mean, I know a lot of people who are like intimidated by the tea break, right? And like doing stuff like that. And I mean, it's beneficial for so many different reasons, just allowing your body to reset, you reset physically, emotionally, whatever. But what I have learned and seen is that being able, like you're talking about, like the integration, like what I would normally go and reach for cannabis for, like what can I do in this moment that is another tool that I have
Mm.
that I probably do along with cannabis, right? But I'm going to do it without it this time because I don't in it. So it's like the plant is working with you when you're not working with the plant
Mm-hmm.
directly
Mm-hmm.
because there's things that you learn, like you said, and then you bring it out and then you do something with it. And then it's like, oh, okay, so I don't need it every time I feel like I'm going to be anxious. And you just naturally stop using. And I cannot stress enough like the amount of like just don't be shameful about the way you use. Don't have guilt around the way you do it. That doesn't benefit anybody unless you get off to being shameful and guilty, or guilted all the time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just give yourself some grace, give yourself some compassion and be like, okay, well, like what can I learn? What can I do differently? And I
Yeah.
think a tea break is a good time of reflection for that.
Yeah. I love that. And, I'm curious for you, like, what do your tea breaks look like these days when you do them? Do you have a set amount of time? Do you kind of do it based on feeling? I'm curious what yours look like when you do decide it's time for one.
Yeah, mine, it just bases on feeling, right? So, like, sometimes it's a few days, sometimes it's like a couple of weeks, sometimes it's several months.
Mm-hmm.
So, it just depends on what I'm doing, like where I'm at and what I feel called to do, right?
Mm.
So, I enjoy using cannabis and meditating. Not that I need it to necessarily do it all the time, but I'm one of the ways that I enjoy using it. I enjoy using it with friends and holding ceremony for friends and stuff like that. So
Mm.
really just depends on where I'm at. It's like very intuitive. Like what do I feel like I need right now in my life?
Yeah,
Right.
I love that. That's really how I do it too. I mean, I have this kind of set structure normally of between Monday and Friday. I don't interact with cannabis, but that was a lot more necessary when I first started getting into using cannabis in this way. Now I'm at a point where if there's a Wednesday, let's say, right, where a friend's coming to town, they're like, hey, I would really like you to host a ceremony for me. And I usually Sherpa people, right? So I go with them. And so, in that scenario, I'll be like, okay, cool. Like I'll interact with cannabis on a Wednesday because I've had 3 or 4 years now of interacting with it consciously and having these breaks and everything. So I trust myself a lot more because I know myself. And I also understand that like I'm not naive enough to think that I could, if I started using cannabis every day, that this natural numbing pattern wouldn't present itself again. So I think a big part of it is
Exactly.
knowing yourself too. It's like knowing what your natural kind of like equilibrium is to numb out with. For me, it's like as challenges in life get bigger, that's when I'm going to start numbing out. And I think this is pretty common for most people. Like as you get more like, just stuff in your life, you naturally want to kind
Mm-hmm.
of fall back. And so for me, normally on the weekends are when I interact with cannabis, typically because I know that the weekends are not stressful for me. It's like, most of my quote unquote stressful time, which I mean, it's really not that stressful at all, but most of the time where things are coming up for me are going to be on the weekdays because I'm thinking about podcasting. I'm booking guests. I'm getting on shows. I'm making programs. I'm making edits to the program. I'm dealing with client issues and things like that. So those are the times where like I could get so full up that I'm like, I just want to numb out of this. And so those days I typically go without cannabis. And on the weekends, that's my creative zone. That's like my idea, creating ceremonies where I'm like, okay, let me see what I might be missing. Right now I'm building the grow program. So I'm talking to cannabis, every weekend about like, okay, what should go in this week? Am I missing anything? Right. Like, because I'll usually write out my initial outline and then I'll dive in and go, did I miss anything? So I'm still doing my end of the work. I'm not expecting cannabis to figure out the whole program for me. But when I have an idea of what I want to do for it for that week, I go, okay, is there anything I'm missing? Is there anything that would be really useful here? Is there anything magical that I could throw in here to make it a little bit more unique? And a lot of times, you know, the downloads I get are so beautiful. One of them that I got was, and this wasn't necessarily for the grow program, but it's something I put in the grow program, is that, you know, very similar to how when a mother is pregnant, her voice is what allows that baby to actually recognize who she is before the baby is born. You know, very similar, before you plant a seed, hold that seed within your mouth to inoculate it with your own microbiome to show the plant, like, hey, I'm safe, right? I'm going to cultivate you and I'm safe. I'll be your parent, but I got your back. You know, at least in my own interpretation, allows the plant to be much more calm right on the onset and realize, like, okay, this person respects me. This person's going to care for me. This person's going to give me love. Because again, especially if you're very similar to human genetics, you know, trauma gets passed down from generation to generation. This is actually just proven scientifically. I forget, I think it's on PubMed now, but this has been a hearsay thing for a long time, that generations of, you know, trauma happen. You know, if you're getting a seed that's been created from lineages that you don't know what, I mean, who knows what the potential trauma that's been put into that lineage is. And so it's kind of like that basis of me interacting with the plant and going, hey, regardless of what's in your lineage, I'm going to treat you with love. I'm going to treat you with compassion. I'm going to care for you. I'm going to make sure to interact with you intentionally. You know, I'm going to give you a safe container from which to express yourself in. And it kind of goes back to that salsa dance analogy, right? Where that masculine component, whether you're male or female, of kind of like directing the plant, of telling it like, hey, I know what I want to interact with you for. You know, I'm not going to just use you all the time. You know, those kind of things, like that allows the feminine component in the salsa dance to actually be able to express herself and feel safe doing so, because she knows the male's got the direction, knows where she's going to go. He's memorized the steps. He knows exactly where to be. So when she does her back bend, he can put her hand on their back, or put his hand on their back to make sure she doesn't fall over, you know? And so it's really interesting. And this is, you know, one of the reasons I love cannabis so much is because, unlike other psychedelics, it is able to be used more frequently, even in a healthy relationship. I mean, I've met people that are interacting with cannabis from sun up to sundown at that period in their life. And they're in this creative, just amazing mindset where they're maybe creating a retreat center or something. And they have a very beautiful relationship with the plant, even though they're interacting with it daily and multiple times throughout the day. And then I've met other people like myself that were only interacting with it once per night, following all the quantitative measures, that were numbing out with it. And so, you know, I think that we spoke really highly about this idea that it really takes discernment once again in one's life to realize, like, hey, do these things apply to me? A good way to know is, and how I first found out about this is, you know, I heard some shaman talk about this. I think it might have been Hamilton Souther years ago, and it triggered the hell out of me, right? Because he was talking about how, yeah, you know, if you want to preserve the transcendental and spiritual properties of the plant, only interact with it a couple times per week. And I was like, who is this guy? You know, who is this guy telling me that I can't smoke cannabis every day? That might be a good idea, that there might be something there for you to explore, you know?
Right. I've been there. I've done that. I've felt that way, you know,
Yeah.
and it gets taken for granted, right? Of how powerful it is. I mean, talking about like the edibles and stuff like that, but even just like people who are daily users, because I mean, I'll sit with people to reintroduce them to the plant who have had challenging experiences in the past, like just needing someone to be grounding, right? And it is like a psychedelic experience. There is somatic release that's going on, you know, and it's a very beautiful thing to witness in that type of environment. And then it's like talking to somebody who is like a daily user or whatever, and they're like, do what? And I'm like, I get it. I feel you. Like, it's taken for granted though, bro. Like, I promise. Like, because when you don't have a daily relationship with it or whatever, you have a really high tolerance. It's harder to get to those places. It's harder to have that like very powerful experience. Not saying that you might not have like some pretty profound like downloads and stuff that come through, right? But to actually have that experience, it's a little bit harder to get there.
Yeah. And it's like the same thing as, like, if you eat ice cream every day, well, then you're probably not going to think, if someone goes, let's go get ice cream, you're like, all right, I guess, whatever. But if you haven't had ice cream in 6 months and someone goes, hey, or even a week, and someone's like, hey, let's go get ice cream, you're like, oh my God, yes, ice cream. Right. And so a lot of times those downloads too, like, until you take a break from something, you don't really know what it's giving you. And so a lot of times, like for me, I was getting these downloads, but I just thought it was normal life. I just didn't really know it was special or to pay attention to them or anything, because I wasn't sober enough to realize that those things weren't there a lot of the time when I was sober. And then when I got into interacting with cannabis this way, I'm like, how do I get more of those in my sober state of reality? And so all these things are so beautiful. And, been an amazing dive. I can't believe we've gone through an hour already. It's amazing. It flew by. And so I want to make sure I give you ample amount of time to talk about all the amazing things you're doing within conscious cannabis coaching, within, consultations. You have the tracker, which is amazing, which I'll put in the show notes. But tell the people where they can find you, where they can get in contact with you if they want to dive in deeper. You have a really beautiful framework for working with cannabis that includes a lot of the components of a typical, I don't want to say Western medicine system, but you have a lot of questions on your intake form that are really beautiful and talking to people about their challenges, how they feel on emotional scales. So, it's really powerful to put those things in there. And so I want to make sure people know where they can find you and where they can access all of that.
Yeah, for sure. I am on Instagram at @thekind_nurse. And then I have a website that is thekindnurse.com. People can send me messages on there. I'm more than happy to answer questions or support in any way that I can. Because I get it, right?
Yeah,
we've
gone through
here
it.
just to help walk each other home. So,
yes.
And then my workbook that I created, which is really awesome. It's for anybody that just really wants to figure out what products and applications really work for them. Because that's a part of it, right? It's understanding the terpene profiles. It's understanding the cannabinoids that you're interacting with. It's taking the time to have the setting, and then just bringing awareness to what you're using. How do you feel? And is that a state that you want to replicate? And how can you do that? Because that's how you optimize an experience, right?
Mm.
That's how you really can customize, like, if you're going to use this plant, like, why not use it intentionally in that manner and get the most you can out of it? So, and there's some information about strengthening the endocannabinoid tone and what that looks like, making sure you're sleeping, making sure you're doing yoga or meditating and being creative with art, like all of these things. And they also enhance your experience with cannabis as well, because the plant can only interact with the system to a certain degree. So the health of your system is also going to make a difference on how well it interacts together. So just a lot of different things taken into consideration with it. But
I love your tracker. It's amazing. And guys, for anyone listening, we'll put the show notes. We'll put it in the show notes, but it's available on Amazon. It's amazing for anyone who just heard this conversation is like, let me dive into this world. It's a beautiful place to start. And, you did such a great job. And it's so gangster. When I started, I was like, this is amazing. And my last question for you, Ariane, is this. Let's say someone listened to this conversation and they're really inspired to look into psychedelic medicines in their own life. What is the one piece of advice that Ariane Williams would suggest to allow them to be able to use discernment in whether or not these medicines are correct for them and their individual experience of life?
Oh, I don't know that there would necessarily be one thing, but I think that what it comes down to, like, making the decision on whether it's right for you is like, what results are you wanting to get from it, right? What is your end goal? And not to necessarily have attachments to it, but at least have an idea of where you're wanting to go with it, right?
Mm.
Because as we've said previously, there's things that can come up, and it doesn't matter whether it's cannabis, psilocybin, ayahuasca, like the whole gamut. There's things that can come up that can alter your life, and you have to be prepared to do something with it on the other side.
Yes.
So what is your goal looking at this? Is this something you want to do? What are you trying to get out of it? Do you have community to support you on the other side? You need to be talking about integration before you even schedule your time to sit with the plant, right?
Yes.
So that would be a tip and advice that I would say for anybody, and things to take into consideration.
Oh, I love that. Okay, guys, Ariane is an absolute rock star. And believe me when I say that having the opportunity to dive in with her on the show and discuss all things cannabis is a treat for this beautiful Monday. Ariane is devoted and committed to helping any of you out there looking to deepen your bond with the cannabis plant with the skill set and tools to do so. And for anyone looking to get in touch with her, to work with her, purchase her incredible new creation, the Cannabis Tracking Journal, or simply connect with her, make sure you check out the show notes, where I will be listing all of the ways in which you can connect with her today. Ariane, thank you so much for being such an amazing friend in my life, for inspiring me daily to continue to dive into the world of cannabis and plant medicines deeper and deeper, and for sharing your time and immense wisdom with the listeners and me on the show today. And until next time, my friend, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.